Hi, everybody. We are joined today by Patrick Rollens, the Public Information Officer for the City of Corvallis. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, it really seems like Corvallis is starting to open up. Could you summarize kind of where we're at?
Sure. So the reopening is managed on a county by county basis by the state of Oregon. And so Benton County entered phase two last Friday, June 5th. And again, if you're kind of familiar with the phases, you know that in phase one, which we entered on May 15th, that allowed some limited resumption of social activities. It allowed some businesses to reopen. It allowed a few different, kind of service sectors to kind of reopen with limited capacity. What it didn't change, and what really didn't change in phase two, is the strong guidance to maintain all of those public health practices that have gotten us this far in our reopening, and that is avoiding unnecessary trips, practicing excellent personal hygiene, hand washing, things like that, wearing a mask if you can, if you're out in public. All of those were in phase one. All of them we're carrying with us into phase two. So as you start to observe things around town, you may see the community start to feel a little bit more liberated, a little bit of a sense that things are returning to normal. And we're trying very hard to get there, but we really do need those public health practices to go with us as we enter phase two.
I am really curious about things like the pool, the library, the senior center, some of these real institutions. Do you have a sense of when they'll be opening up, or can kids expect to go to the pool this summer, all of that?
Sure, it's a really good question, and one we've certainly heard from lots of different people on a bunch of different venues. Those are very large, very public facilities, and they're covered in specific guidance from the governor's office. And so far, we haven't found anything in phase two that would allow the pool, for example, to reopen, the Osborne Aquatic Center. Well, I should take that back. So pools can reopen, but they must reopen in such a limited capacity that we're not sure what we could offer at Osborne Aquatic Center that will look like typical operations. Things like having one swimmer per lane in a lap pool, period. That's some fairly limited guidance. And to say nothing of the outdoor portion of Osborne Aquatic Center, which is Otter Beach. That's typically crawling with kids all summer long. Right. We're really thinking hard right now about exactly how to reopen these facilities in phase two. Likewise with the library, it is a community meeting place. The point of the library is to go and make social connections, and it's very hard to find the right balance to operate a facility like that when you're asking people to stay 6 feet away, wear a mask, avoid touching shared surfaces, which, by the way, that's what books are, is a shared surface.
Yes.
We're taking a really cautious approach at the City of Corvallis. I suspect you will see some measured reopening of these facilities in phase two, which is the current phase we're in. But we're not rushing it. What we are doing is re-engineering the interior of a lot of these facilities to guide traffic a little bit, to avoid people having face-to-face encounters if we can avoid it. We're putting up those like plastic sneeze guard things where people would interact with staff, because really we've actually have two priorities with a lot of these facilities. You've got to balance the needs of the customers or the patrons, but then you've got to balance the safety of your staff. And our staff has really, across the city, has really risen to the occasion over the last 2 or 3 months. And we have a really strong obligation to kind of keep them safe and ease our way into this reopening.
That's really interesting. Do you have a sense of, like, over the next 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, or, parents are looking for activities for their kids for the summer, and I hear you saying that you're looking closely at what you might be able to do. Do you have a sense of when you will be more clear about what you can do in phase two?
It'll definitely be this month. One of the things I know that's in sort of the final stages of discussion is summer camps through Parks and Recreation. We know that's a huge priority for families who are looking for something for their kids to do and need a little bit of a pressure release valve. And so I know there are advanced discussions going on at Parks and Recreation about relaunching summer camps later in June or early July. So that's an example. We got to do things like bring our staff back, many of whom have been working remotely, develop, revise these programs to account for physical distancing and maybe mask wearing and the ability to, or the fact that we won't be able to go to a lot of these uh, places like the pool, for example. You can't drag a class of 30 kids to the pool anymore. It won't have the same experience when you get there. But again, we know there's a demand for this, and so we're definitely taking steps to relaunch and reopen those services. I expect to have an announcement later this month about summer camps.
Wow, that's fantastic. And what about local events over the summer? I mean, I guess I feel like I know your answer, but I am curious about the concert series. I think I heard that was canceled, or the fall festival, or really a lot of things that the city's involved in over the summer. What can people expect?
Yeah, I mean, that's like you said, that you can try to reimagine those events through the lens of this new normal we're living in. And in some cases you can make it work. In other cases, you've got to really radically go in a new direction. For example, I heard that the 4th of July fireworks celebration has been canceled. That wasn't one that the city organized, but I think we were like a co-sponsor or something like that. But again, there are some good news stories to tell about this. I would point to last weekend, the graduation parade for the school district. That came together in really short order, and it seemed to go off pretty well. There was, some traffic, and there was some long lines, but I think overall the community really relished the opportunity to come together and celebrate the graduates. And you saw people celebrating in a way that would have seemed really foreign 6 or 7 months ago.
Right. What about buildings like City Hall, and coming in and dealing with permits and all of that kind of thing? What can people expect there?
Yeah, so I'll start by mentioning that, City Hall, city services, they never stopped during the pandemic. We just closed off portions of buildings to the public, but we continued to process building permits. We continued to provide community policing, paramedic support. All of the sort of core services of the city remained intact throughout the pandemic. So when you talk about reopening, really we're talking about what we call walk-up customers to some of these customer service desks at the city. So the building department desk, the utility billing, payment counter, a couple of others here and there, the front desk at City Hall where you'd come for to make an appointment with the mayor or something. Those will be reopened in a fairly limited manner, and we're actually finalizing the signage and the floor decals and everything just this week. I actually spent some time this week sticking those circular floor decals on the floor to sort of denote where customers should be standing when they're waiting in line to talk to people. Yeah. So things are going to look and feel different when you come to City Hall. And, we're really still encouraging people to just do your business online if at all possible. Mm-hmm. I was talking to the building division, the development services division, mm-hmm. and they have had consistent business right through the pandemic because developers in town know how to use the online submittal process. They feel comfortable with it. We've had it in place now for about 2 years. And I think they see the value in being able to do everything electronically. So we have been able to kind of keep up with building permits and things like that right through the pandemic. It's only those larger meetings where you kind of bring together like 6 or 8 people, and you've got to kind of all look at a plan or something like that and make some decisions. Those are what are going to be challenging to resume doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, it's interesting how people have found ways to do things they have to do online, or have assumed that doing something where you have to have social distancing, wouldn't really work out. But in fact, sitting around with 2 or 3 other couples outside around a fire, 6, 7, 8 feet away with masks or whatever is doable and can be fun,
It has happened. It has happened in my backyard, I can confirm.
Yes, exactly. Well, what can people do to help advance the opening plan?
The thing to understand about phase 3 is currently, per the governor's current guidance, we can only enter phase 3 when there is a treatment or a vaccine for COVID.
Oh.
And so, if you just do the math, that means we're going to be in phase 2 for a long time. I've been telling people, get comfortable with phase 2 because we're going to be here for a long time. And so when I talk about maintaining those public health guidelines, wearing a mask, avoiding unnecessary trips, staying physically distant when you're in crowds, those are going to have to become second nature. Not to get hyperbolic, but I think that those are things that kids are going to be taught in school moving forward for years to come. Just these basic public health guidelines, that have helped us get this far in the pandemic.
Right.
We can't slip. And I'll just point out here in the EOC, we've got a big sort of data board projected up on the wall that shows the epidemiological curve of Oregon. Our much esteemed curve that we've talked about, flattening the curve.
Yeah.
And the fact is, we're seeing an increase in confirmed cases right now at this time in our pandemic, and that's due to a couple of different things. It's certainly due to increased testing. If you're testing more, you're finding more cases, and your curve's going to go up. But it's also due to some of the relaxed behaviors we've seen that really started Memorial Day weekend. As we kind of got into phase one, and people felt like they needed to get outdoors and start resuming some social activities. And the incubation period for COVID is 2 to 14 days. So about 2 weeks after Memorial Day is when we would expect to see cases start to rise, and in fact we did see that. I would expect something similar 2 to 14 days after these large community protests and demonstrations we've seen, which they're a wonderful expression of community support and solidarity, but they're also going contrary to all of the public health guidelines that we've been championing for the last 3 months. So we're keeping track of that. And there are still outbreaks happening all over Oregon. You may have heard that just in the last few days, Lincoln County reported 100 cases related to I think a seafood processing plant over on the coast. So that's an example of how, well, I guess we could say the virus is certainly not done with Oregon yet. And so we're going to be in phase 2 for a while.
You said the term EOC.
Oh yeah, I did.
So what is that? Is that where you are? This is the Emergency Operations Center, I assume?
Yeah, EOC is the Emergency Operations Center. And here in Benton County, it's a joint City of Corvallis, Benton County operation. That's a little bit unusual. In most Oregon counties, the county itself shoulders the entire responsibility of managing a pandemic response or any other emergency disaster response. Here in Benton County, because we're a fairly small county and we're really dominated by Corvallis, and we have some kind of unique challenges related to student population, things like that, we made the decision a couple of years ago to pursue a joint city-county emergency operations center for just such a reason like this. A situation where it's a county-wide concern. The city has resources that they could bring to the table to help the county. And so that's what we've been working on. The EOC launched in mid-March, and we have been running 5 days a week ever since.
And what do you do?
What do we do? So you may have heard, many people around the community may have heard mentions of the EOC. We talk about it at city council meetings. We talk about it at county commissioner meetings. We coordinate various things around town. The core goal of the EOC during this pandemic is to support the Benton County Health Department. So the Benton County Health Department, they are the local experts on the pandemic and the outbreak and our response. No one else in Benton County or Corvallis has that expertise. Sometimes there's this sort of assumption that somebody at the city manages the pandemic, right? Well, no, we don't actually have that expertise in the city, but the county does. And so it made a lot of sense to lend the county the resources of the city at the very outset of this pandemic, to give them as much as they could have, as many tools as they needed to respond quickly and robustly. The county has, they have communicable disease experts. They have epidemiologists, that's a mouthful, that have been really plugged into COVID since it emerged in China in December 2019. And so they kind of knew what was coming, and they knew that the steps we needed to take. And so when we launched the EOC, they were directing traffic and telling us, we need to start stockpiling personal protective equipment. We need to build a plan for alternative care. We need to build a mass casualty plan to deal with possibly a number of people dying at once in Benton County. Not many people know that, but we actually have a limited morgue capacity here in Benton County with our local funeral home community. We just don't have a lot of space if there were a lot of deceased persons at once. So the point of the EOC was to really plan and look at all of these possible scenarios and start making a list and assigning them to people and saying, hey, you go figure out what to do if this happens. You go figure out what to do if this happens. I need you to start calling around and trying to get donations of public personal protective equipment. At the same time, we also had this, massive influx of donors from the community, people who wanted to step up and get involved. And so a big component of the EOC has been managing donations and, kind of steering people in the right direction and targeting that goodwill. And I think this was an important role because, there's a lot of goodwill in the community, and it really helps to have a municipal government or a position of authority kind of behind the donations to give people a sense of security and confidence that where they're giving is going in the right direction. So that was something that kind of got started in response to community demand, and I think we did some good work over the last couple months.
My hats go off to you guys and everyone, really, most people in Corvallis and Benton County, because, for example, I think people really are wearing their masks, in public by and large. And generally there has been good social distancing. Hey, there you go. You got your mask right there.
It's close at hand. It's always close at hand.
I know. I realized, I got to be washing these things actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I'm not mistaken, in Benton County, we've kept our caseload quite low, in comparison to many other places. So, thank you guys for what you've done and for the initiative you've taken. And, thanks to all Corvallisians and Benton County residents for taking this issue seriously. Thanks also for taking a quick moment to explain where things are at with the city and the Emergency Operations Center. I really appreciate it. And I really think that just getting this kind of detail is really nice and helpful for people who may only be able to read a quick article in the paper or, for whatever reason, don't have a lot of the information on what's happening. So,
and that's understandable. No one in the community has to be an expert on exactly how the city and county are going to respond to a pandemic. But I do hope that this gives them confidence that the response is taking place and has been since, like I said, March. So we're on it.
Yes, well, absolutely. And again, everyone, this has been Patrick Rollens, the Public Information Officer for the City of Corvallis. And I am Sev Williams at Benton County COVID Connection. Patrick, thank you again. We really appreciate it. And we will get this out to the people.
All right. Thanks, Sev.